Yes, yes, yes. The hour, is here. In case it's the first time you're having this opportunity, welcome to this life. This opportunity to experience me life. And I always start my way by way of introduction by saying simply, my name is Victor Prince Dickson, and I am known as the Transformer symbol. And of recent, I've decided to start a two-channel approach to sharing what I've learned in the field, what my practice has been all about, what my engagement and the scope of my work, both the vertical as well as the horizontal, the entire scope of what it covers and what I have come to see. It's a major urgency in the world today. In case you don't know, I am a human system engineer. I pay a lot of attention into seeing how best we can help humans, to really be optimized. I believe in the foundational principle that says that there are two kinds of people on planet Earth. You have the human assets, and also you have the human liability. And the basic principle behind this two structure or basket is because for human liabilities, one of the things that become very common with them as a major characteristics is that human liabilities take more than they give. So whether you're dealing in terms of employment, whether it is at the level of relationship, marriage, whatever you like, whatever the engagement, the principle is simple. They take more than they give. It's not that they don't give, but on a scale, they give less than they take. And if you understand the simple principle of investment and savings and withdrawal, when you begin to take more than you put in, then there's going to be some negative somewhere along the line. So that's actually the challenge of human assets. And this is quite dynamic. And we're dealing with humans here. So sometimes this can be very, very abstract. But then when you sum up all the activities, the mindset, the behavior, the belief systems, the thinking patterns, the emotions, the entire logic of the engagement and the relationship, human liabilities will always, always, at every point in time, maybe not in an event, but collectively, will always give less than they take. And for that purpose, the progress of the universe is always thwarted. People don't go far. Systems, societies really don't develop much because the people take more than the environment offers them. But then on the other hand, you have human assets. And human assets are the ideal set of people. These are the people who give more than they take. So whether in the place of work, in the place of relationship and marriage, they do the same thing. They are just conscious of the fact that they will take from you, but they make sure that they add more value to the table. They bring more value to the table more than what they take out of the relationship, the engagement, the contract, whatever it is. So it simply says that they deposit more than they withdraw. And so whatever they withdraw, they always have some left behind. And that is actually the secret of progress. The entire universe is structured around that form of relationship and engagement. That as long as you're in planet Earth, you should be able to add more to the planet than you take more from the planet. And so it is under this umbrella that I have been doing a lot of work when it comes to coaching and consulting. So it gives me opportunity to see people in terms of their personality, see them evolve in terms of transformation as an individual. But also working with systems, institutions, and organizations also give me an opportunity to understand how a community is structured. It gives me an opportunity to understand how systems by themselves evolve over the years and even transform. So at the end of the day, I have that privilege of owning two lenses, to two opportunities, two perspective to see one thing, but two different, perspective. And it is that same logic that I brought into my life programs. So on Facebook, I am focused on personal transformation, and my Facebook live is strictly only on Fridays, 8 p.m. West African time. But then when you come to Mondays, that is my YouTube time, 8 p.m. West African time too. But this time around, I focus so much more on business, institutions, organization, as well as systems. And so today, and this channel is actually for systems. So today I'll be discussing something that is extremely very important, that sometimes people take for granted. And what I mean people take for granted is that if 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 loneliness, today I'll be focusing on industrial loneliness. If loneliness is supposed to be a continent, honestly, I think it's going to be the biggest continent in the world, because so far, available statistics says that on an average, one out of every 6%, is going through some level of loneliness. But that is much more than that. However, I wouldn't want to go deeper into that. I want to keep this as simple as I can, especially just so that leaders, CEOs, will be able to extract the best of what they can, to be able to see how best they can improve the organizations, and try to see how they can improve organizational culture, and see how they can make work culture to be a little bit more psychologically safe, you know. And so for that reason, I'll be focusing on organizational loneliness today. Sometime back, I think that was last year, I had written this book, and that is Lonely to Legendary: How Deep Connection Transform People and Then Workplace Culture. I think this is one of my very, very strong selling book. And the major reason being that, like I said earlier on, I have that privilege and opportunity to consistently see how system operates, dig into system, through consultancy, through assessment, having that opportunity to look at the entire work environment, from a bird's eye view. And then also having that privilege to also discuss with individuals. And I think one thing that organizations are taking for granted is actually industrial loneliness. And in the most simplest form of it, industrial loneliness simply means, if you like, you call it a disorder, and it's a disorder of disconnection. It simply means people are in a workplace, the way the workplace is presently designed, the way the entire journey towards KPIs have been designed, even the way the HR system, most times, are traditionally designed, if you like, put it that way. At the end of the day, if you look at the flow, one of the major loophole and the weakness of the structures is actually industrial loneliness. Oftentimes, we try to buffer up the technical unit. We try as much as possible to see how to bring in expertise with all this headhunting, bring the best brain in the system. But you really get to understand that if you're within the organizational structure, expertise individually makes so much of sense. But what makes an organization um, strong, what makes an organization entirely powerful, is because it has what they call collective intelligence. It means you're dealing with numerous number of persons working together as a team with the same energy, possibly with a level of rhythm, you know, aiming for one single target. So at the end of the day, you have a community approach to solving problem. You have a community energy into problem solving. So even into value creation, it's all about every unit, every force, um, every connection, all of them supplying what makes them at their very best, just so that collectively the organization will get the best of results. But the challenge so far has shown that consistently this has not been the case. At a point, most people tell you you just have to put up, structures. A lot of people will tell you the best you need to do. The SOPs are the thing missing for most technical consultants and the rest of them. But most time, even when all of this have been put in place, somehow you still get to see that struggle to get the kind of result you want. You look at that return on investment you're hoping for, the production deadline not being met, the entire flow, organizational flow, breaking somewhere along the line, and you're just wondering what is it you're not fixing. But we tend to forget because oftentimes we don't treat people generally as the core and the most important unit of an organization. We see them as an addendum, something that can um, you know that should be added, but not so much thought put into them. And so at the end of the day, we hire and fire at will, except maybe when you have some industrial structures, and safeguards trying to, keep employee a little bit safe. But outside that, at the end of the day, the experience has been that people come into the system and then they go through the entire system, but not performing at their very best. And the challenge is that when you're thinking why people are not performing at their very best, one of the major things that we are missing is loneliness. But now, loneliness not at a personal level, but loneliness now in a collective environment where not only one person is lonely, but where you have a collective of people being lonely. So you have a community of 20, a tribe of a 50, of 100, independently are experts if you may like. But now also collectively, they are also all lonely. Maybe not all, but majority of them are lonely. And so here you see how things start begin to affect performance, and then you start to see how it affects delivery. You see how it affects team spirit. It begin to see how a lot of work cannot be done, not because they are not necessarily experts, not because they don't possess the quality to be able to churn out the kind of work you expect from them, but mainly because at their state of mind, their state of mind is not intended with that organizational structure or flow that we have established. And so, because of that, in the most simplest form, industrial loneliness is that feeling of being continually disconnected. That's why I call it the disease of disconnection. If you know people are working, they are busy, but they feel unseen, they feel unsupported because of the way modern workplace and institutions are designed and operated. And in principle, there are four major logics, and what I would call the four dimensions for what makes up industrial loneliness. The first one is cognitive loneliness, because you see, as a leader, as a CEO, as a member of the C-suite, league, oftentimes we have the opportunity consistently maybe through coaching, consulting, and then you see that fatigue, that concern of I thought we brought in the best team. I thought we invested through a process that brought in some of the best brains. But why are we not seeing that result? That is one concern that every CEO, most owners of organizations, you know, seems to be battling with. They look at their investment, but the return of investment is not commensurate with what they are getting. And so that is why we may, I usually call it the blind spot. Is it possible that you have done everything right, but one major weakness you may be facing is that thing called industrial loneliness, where not only one person is lonely, but majority of your staff, your team members, and even your unit heads are actually going through a loneliness experience, and then put together, that affects the kind of results you get. Now, if you're in that place where you start to sense that kind of thing, one of the things that you may need to look out for is what I call the four dimensions of industrial loneliness. The first one is cognitive loneliness. And what is cognitive loneliness? Cognitive loneliness is um, when you have staff who feel that nobody seems to appreciate their their contributions, the way they think, the way they reason. And how does that happen? Most times that happens where, as an organization, you've not really paid so much attention to things like psychological safety. And then you have a team where maybe you are discussing a deadline related kind of conversation. And then in the board meeting or maybe in the strong room when you are brainstorming, everybody's looking at the problem from a perspective of a deadline. Timing is their concern. But somewhere along the line in your team, you have someone who decides to ask a little bit more question that is not related to timing. How- However, it is also very relevant in terms of function, in terms of value, in terms of delivery. And sometimes we get carried away and then we shut that person down. We're discussing delivery here. What is bringing the function here? What is bringing innovation to the table? Can you just keep quiet? Let's focus on this. And for especially environments that are not very, very sensitive, there are people who laugh at people like that. And it lowers, they begin to ask themselves a question. Why do I think the way I think? Is it that I am thinking wrongly? And because I'm thinking wrongly, that's why my contributions are not accepted. And that's why they laugh at my contributions. And that's why what I try to bring to the table simply really don't make sense. And what happens is that you trigger an emotional roller coaster with such a person. And so gradually the person begins to make sense of that, make negative sense actually, make negative sense of that capacity and capability to even think beyond what is the core that is on the table. So rather than thinking in a very wide, expansive frame now, they begin to narrow their thought, force themselves to like, maybe something is wrong with me. That is why I think the way I think. And that is not in tandem with organizational flow. And the logic of that, therefore, it triggers perhaps a shame, triggers some level of discomfort and less confidence. And before you know, gradually that staff, that team member begins to shut down. And then the entire intelligence you brought into the table or you brought into the room, the entire headhunting, the process you went through to bring some of this best brain to be in that room begins to diminish. Because at that point, that team member begins to feel cognitive loneliness. And they feel their thoughts are not so valid, they are not so intelligent. Maybe who cares about what they think? That takes away from the overall assets that makes up the organization. The second dimension that makes up what you may call industrial loneliness is emotional loneliness, which already are linked to that. But this is where you still again, you've done your homework in bringing some of the best brain to your team. And here you are feeling I have put together the best brain that will give us the best flow. Our KPIs are assured. We are very confident we get results. So maybe you're telling your investors that your return of investment, you know, is sure everybody should be resting. But somewhere along the line again, you get to realize you are not getting the kind of results you crave for or the kind of results you invested for. Now, the perspective and the lens in this angle now is that you are dealing with people who perhaps may be having their own personal challenges. A parent's death, a divorce, a child death, and the rest of them, which oftentimes some organizations treat it as an event, knowing entirely well that grieving and mourning goes through an entire process. And so you treat it as, okay, let's go visit this one that has lost the husband or wife. Um, Maybe something tragic happened. And then in that one time you're done and you leave. As far as you're concerned as an organization, we have shown empathy, we have shown care. And so as far as you're concerned, hello, come back into the system, let us begin to work at API, deadline and everything. You begin to push. But unfortunately, you're dealing with someone who is not healed. You're dealing with someone who's still grieving. And you're dealing with someone who's still mourning. And then, these things are a little bit very personal and peculiar to each individual based on exposure, based on their knowledge, and based on even their exposure to things like emotional intelligence and even to the healing process and trauma management. So, to a large extent, you are asking someone who is not ready to come into the system. And so, when you invite them back into the system, what they are saying is that you are asking their expertise back, but you're not asking their humanity back. And so oftentimes they feel delineated, kind of. They feel delineated. They feel, look, we are really not part of this group. They really don't care how I feel. They just care that I man my debts. They just care that marketing continues. They just care that sales should, shoot up. They just care that I am just in that front desk. They just care that I should keep heading the unit because the product needs to be released on a set day. Now, while all those things are very important, we will not allow personal pains to entirely crumble the direction of an organization. Deadline, especially in a competitive environment like us, like what we are facing today. However, you're dealing with a human being, you're dealing with an expert who will never be who is less at the optimal level. So you're dealing with someone who can give you their best because emotionally they are going to be isolated from the team. What they are going through, as far as they are concerned, the organization is not aware of it, or the team don't care. That's just the language there. And so for that reason, you cannot get the best out of them. Why? Because in that emotional state, you're going to deal with things that will affect um, a person's decision making, a person's behavior, and then by extension, a person's performance. And so while you are looking at performance from an expert-driven perspective, what we are saying is that industrial loneliness can take away from performance from an emotional perspective. And so you have an expert, but you don't get the best out of your expert. You don't get 100% out of your expert. You're getting maybe a 70, in some cases a 60, and there are cases you can even get a 50. I have seen situations for one organization, we worked with that, one of their best brain will always say, I just come to work, but then I just don't want anybody to complain. But God knows that my spirit is in here because I really feel nobody here cares about my pains and what I'm going through. What they care about, they just want me on board. They just want me to keep coding and the rest of it. Now, with that kind of mindset, you now get a liability rather than an asset at that very moment in time. This is one of the major costs of industrial loneliness. The next cost of industrial loneliness or dynamics that plays out um, within the context of industrial loneliness is purpose loneliness. A lot of people come to, because of the challenges in the world today, majority of people are struggling to just get a job. For them, like they say, they want to make ends meet. And so most people even develop what we call the hustling mindset. So for them, anything works. If this is the expertise, what is required now is a high expertise in AI. Okay, fine, I've developed it. So here I am. I just want to get my salary, go back and take care of my issues. So the person comes into the system, and then usually as life plays it, After a while, the person gets a little bit more comfortable with the system now. At least there is a more assured source of income. And life has a way of asking you questions when you get to one stage, and it asks you questions about the next stage. And that is where the question now becomes, where exactly are you heading to with this? And that's where the next problem is. And so you have someone who is a member of the team who somehow has not been able to align with the purpose of, the leader of the unit, has not been able to even align with the vision of the organization. But in this context, the organization are taking care of their bills, but the direction the organization is going to is a place they don't believe in. And sometimes they themselves are struggling also to find a new. So at the end of the day, you're dealing with an expert who is disjointed. You're dealing with an expert who is not wholesome. So by implication, what that does, therefore, is that you're going to get someone who is good at their place of work, delivers the technical demands, but that connection is not there. They don't just believe what the organization is doing. They don't believe the vision of the leader of the organization. What they find here to be convenient enough, especially for what they want out of life. So the implication at that level is that you're dealing with someone who is by purpose is feeling alone, that I'm not together. After all, nobody even know where I'm heading to. Nobody knows where I am coming from. Nobody knows what I'm struggling with. Nobody knows my destination. But well, I'm providing services all the same. So at the end of the day, you are still going to trigger on some level of emotional engagement with that person. And what that means is that you're dealing with someone who is not at their maximum or at their optimal level. And anyone oftentimes who is not at their optimal level, oftentimes is always leaning towards becoming a liability. Yes, they become so good, or everybody knows they are so good, but the best of them does not come into the organization. And the consequence of that is that the organization is not harvesting the best of what it has invested in. So it becomes some kind of friction between less return on investment on what more has been poured into. Again, like I said, the asset liability game comes to play. Then lastly is the identity loneliness. There are people who identity crisis makes you lonely in principle because oftentimes you find it difficult to find a connection. You're struggling with who you are. You're asking yourself a question, who am I as a person? And so you carry these identity struggles and then you go into an organization. And then because there is that internal turmoil, there is that division between yourself, who am I? Consistently asking that question. Again, you really can't bring your asset value into the system. The best you can do is survival, value. You now try to bring what can be tolerated, what can perhaps sometimes be applauded, but really not what makes you the best and why you were brought into the system. And so here you are. If you look at these four core areas, the cognitive loneliness, if you look at the emotional loneliness, if you also look at the purpose loneliness as well as the identity loneliness, take them together collectively. You may see a roll call, an employer map of some of the best brains. I mean, people that independently were highly valued, but the results you get out of it, of them, or collectively, is less than what you have expected. Sometimes it can be industrial loneliness that is affecting the kind of results you expect. And so, what normally causes it quickly, I will drop a few lines. One of the things that trigger this usually is looking at the source code that trigger these realities in organization. The first one is the collapse of the traditional society. Before now, and that speaks to connection again. Before now, people were in cohorts. You have families, you have tribes, you have community that share the same value, the same meaning, they're heading to the same destination. Everything was together. So because it was communal and collective, everyone has some semblance of safety kind of, because they know they have other people around them. They were connected and they were some kind of anchor within the community. But as society begins to evolve consistently, and then we have a work system that moved from a community base to now where strangers just come together and everybody try to become a labor force, as we call it, a unit of resources, a kind of an employee hitman. That the courtesy of telling everybody, oh yeah, we spend 5 days in the same workplace, but there's nothing really so special about it. And so oftentimes, because we have not been able to replicate that traditional society in the workplace, even with all the picnics and all of them, a lot of effort is being made, no doubt. It's not a total collapse, but this effort has not successfully, created the best of alternative for what makes the traditional system. So what that means, therefore, is that people are together, but they are not grounded together. They are not connected together. They really do not have a very good relationship outside. What is your password? Which email am I sending you? When are we having the boardroom meeting? And then what is our target? And what is the salary? Any salary increase and the rest of that. So basically, and don't forget, there's a lot of pillars we've put in place to make sure we manage people. But in managing them, sometimes we've not been able to combat them to become so united. So organizations who go out of their way to make this effort are the ones who are seeing results. So you see such organizations producing far better results than even organizations that have better competence or better competent hands, if you like. Less competent organizations, but who have better coherence. They are more anchored with each other, get more results. Because why the organization with better coherence, they are not suffering the industrial loneliness. And so they bring their best at par with their duty, their responsibility, and and their space. The next thing that triggered industrial loneliness is digital economy. The digital economy is one of those fundamental growth engines nobody can take away. The role of AI technology, the ease, convenience, speed, all of them, you really cannot undermine every one of them. But in the process also, many have become closer to their desktop and to their computer, to their workstation, and there is no relationship with even the people they work with. They just come in, the first greeting, then they sit down, and that's the end. The rest is just, they are passing assignments, teamwork, ideas, concepts, um, you know, um, what do you call it now? Disruptive notes and the rest of them. So that's what they are just exchanging. And then perhaps some will have even the grace to stand up a little bit and go for lunch and perhaps discuss a little bit. For many, immediately they sit down, that's all. So they sit entirely all through to the evening, and then on the elevator, on the passage hallway, everybody just greets again, perhaps through the bus and the train, and everybody greets again, and then everybody goes. So to a large extent, there is no time for connection, there's no time for bonding. And the damage of that is that you're dealing with people who are extremely very familiar with their laptop, they trust their laptop, they believe in the laptop even much more than they believe the next human being by them. And that is why you get to see that most people are creating profiles with artificial intelligence to make them friends, just so that they find a way of connecting. But this is a connection without a soul, and therefore it extends the entire cost implication of industrial um, loneliness. Then the next one is hyper specialization. This is where, in trying to become an expert, we forget to learn every other area of meaningful relationship. And one of the most popular one I always use is like, how come a man would be so good in managing an organization with 500 staff, very efficient, but that same man will not be able to manage a wife and then 2 children. Yes, there are different dynamics, but they're all human beings, the baseline. And the reason is because that same man has spent close to 15 years or above trying to learn and master the art of managing family. They have been taught, they have gone through exams, they have gone through scenario simulations, they have gone through management meeting, they have gone through, in fact, it has been training and training just to make sure they manage 500 people. But somehow they have not spent the time, you know, to also learn the art and the science of managing a wife and two children. So you see a successful CEO not being able to manage a family. Now, not necessarily because they really are bad, as in terms of bad husbands per se, no. It's a matter of skills and competence and attention as well as focus. The focus was becoming competent and skillful in managing 500 people, but not knowing how to manage other dynamics in a relationship. So it's the same thing with the hyper specialization. Sometimes, in trying to be an expert in a particular field, we become tone deaf to other demands, skill, engagement, competences that is required to manage cross-border. So you see someone who comes into the workplace, as far as they are concerned, they really don't have anything to do with anybody. My work here, I'm just the auditor, so I just audit and then walk away. And so at the end of the day, there is no connection. My work here is as a developer. I sit down, give me the keyboard, and I work on the code. I have no relationship with anyone. I'm just good at what I'm doing. Yes, you're good at what you're doing, but at the end of the day, it triggers some level of, well, leave him alone. He doesn't have time for anybody in the team. Leave him alone. He's just on his own. And that oftentimes can also trigger industrial loneliness. And to be honest with you, anytime a person is feeling less than they should, they will also think less than they should. By implication, they will also decide less than they should and then perform less than they should because they are not at their optimal level. The implication of that is you're now going to have an asset gradually become a liability. And lastly, the fourth trigger is transactional leadership. Most CEOs are just so focused on KPIs. Nothing concerns them. For them, the only care is I need to get the investor money back. I need to make my investors happy. And so at the end of the day, they don't care entire the value chain of how that process works. So they don't have a connection with their staff. They don't have their connection with their unit head, or what they are very, very um, concerned about is backing out others. Demanding every one of their job description is a consistent JD relationship. Look, this is your job description. This is what you're supposed to do. And even if the person is looking as if he wants to faint, I don't care. This is what I asked you to do, and this is what you need to do. While productivity, deadline, as well as efficiency in the place of work, cannot be seconded. It's not something you undermine. But there's also a need to know that without a connection um, with your team, it is difficult for you to get the best out of your team. So if you're a transactional leader who consistently don't care about the safety, the welfare of your team, how they feel, their personal challenges, and the rest of them, you will not get it. That's what they call the discretional effort. And that discretional effort is what a leader gets from, you know, those is leading, um, from your staff. These are, and discretional effort in the most simplest form is when you have a staff doing much more than their job description requires them to do. And you can't do that except there is some higher connection between you and your team lead, where you believe that this vision you is together. So even when something the needle moves a little bit away from your job description, the fact is that you want this thing to succeed, and it makes no difference. And this is why, while there is a challenge of having bosses calling their employees after work and the rest of them, but also there is that place where it is not the leader or the CEO enforcing on the team that they must stay and work after work hours. It is the team enforcing on themselves based on the relationship and the connection, with the team, with how to stay a little bit more and then deliver value. That is what makes the difference. Now, at the end of the day, the entirety of this discussion is focused on one thing. You can invest in the best tech. You can bring the best brain, put them together in one brain, structure them in the entire flow, make sure that all your systems are everything, all the T's are crossed and all the I's are dotted. The fact remains that productivity, however you put it together, is highly hinged on the full capacity of a human being. And so if your team are not feeling fully involved, they are not fully connected to you, the organization, the vision of that organization, then there's every likelihood that they will perform less than optimal. And what that means is that you're going to have a collective of assets, but you may get in the result as if you're dealing with a collection of liabilities. And that is the challenge you need to pay attention to. This is the first in the series. I intend to be going deeper and deeper. And I believe one of the things that will help you is if you get this book. This book has really helped a lot of CEOs to understand both the personal aspect of loneliness and then the industrial loneliness. So it helps you, I treated both of them here. So it helps you understand them from their true lenses. And even as an individual, is there a place where you as a leader is falling short of the organization, even though you are leading the team, and your leadership is falling short of the kind of results you want to get? You're not showing up well simply because you're also struggling with your kind of industrial learning. It is quite possible because you see, at the end of the day, everyone has a blind spot, and until you take that extra effort to make sure that you're holistic and you're well grounded and anchored, to make sure you check every aspect of you to know, are there places you're missing, especially when you're not getting the best of your return on investment for which you have expected. I will end here today, and if there are any questions, please make sure you drop it. I'll make sure I pick it up, and then subsequently in other series, I'll be able to review them and discuss further on it. And then if you think you want to reach out to me personally, I will drop my mail. I think I also have my mail on the YouTube link. Then you can also mail me, and then we can take this a little bit further in case you want something more personal. And if you want the book also, there is a link for that book, which if you get, I believe will do you so much well. So until I see you next time, again, my name is Victor Prince Dickson, the Transformer. Make the best of what you have. Never forget that an asset can be a liability if their loneliness challenge is left unchecked. I leave you today and say, make the best of life.